Welcome back, everyone, to the vIQtory podcast. I'm your host, Steve McGrath, alongside Chris Haddad, as always. And with us tonight, we have another very special guest, none other than 10-year NFL vet, Sage Rosenfels. Came into the NFL with the Redskins in 2001 and spent time with 5 different organizations. He's taking the time with us right now to go over different parts of his career and talk about what he's up to now. Sage, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the show.
Now, we know that you're from a small town in Iowa. You ended up playing your football, your career at the collegiate level at Iowa State. Can you just tell us, what was it like growing up in Iowa, and how did you ultimately end up becoming a multi-sport athlete and getting to Iowa State?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town called Andrew, Iowa. It was really about 300 people, 350 people, one building school, K through 12. I went there until middle school, but we grew up in the country on about 10 acres. My parents were hippies back in the day, so we had a huge garden. I think almost an acre garden. I think we slaughtered about 50 chickens every year. As I think at one time I said in the USA Today article, my parents were organic before organic was cool. And so I was the fourth of 5 kids. I had 2 older brothers, and we played sports. That's what we did. We had my dad originally when I was really young, we had a tree in the middle of we had a sort of circular driveway out there in the country, and we had a sort of a grass spot in the middle of it, and there was a tree, and my dad put a backboard on the tree with a rim. That was our first hoop, and we played a lot of games out there, summer, winter, snow. Did not matter. We'd jump off the tree and dunk. We'd bend the rim. My dad would get upset. So then he finally actually built us a decent basketball court on the property or whatever. So that's what we did. We played basketball. We played baseball. Football, I was usually the all-time quarterback, and my brothers would go one-on-one. Which I really do realize. People always thought I was a pretty good passer in basketball. If you're a really good passer, you don't have to run as much. So I think that's actually what I realized. If you get a good rebound and you're a good outletter, you can get like an assist from like a deep throw. That's way better than running all the way down the court and trying to be a part of the offense. So I guess I was a good passer from an early age, and I'm sure I reaped a lot of benefits of having 2 older brothers who were good athletes in their own right, and me trying to compete against them, and then probably them actually occasionally letting me win was nice. And so. Yeah, I played, most of my high school, played 4 sports all through high school. Actually, my senior year played 5 sports. And in Iowa, we have summer baseball. So you do have 4 full seasons, fall, winter, spring, and actually a summer season with baseball. So I was busy. I didn't have many nights after school, middle school or high school, where I didn't have a sport to go to. I didn't go and hang out at, Jimmy's house and play video games. We didn't have video games at my house. We didn't even have cable TV until I think I was a junior in high school. We had very few. We had the bunny ears, and I think at one point my parents actually put an antenna on the top of our house, but we didn't have cable TV or direct TV or anything like that. So we played sports. That's what we did, and probably because I was a good basketball and baseball player, and I was a decent high school football player. I got a scholarship to Iowa State, and they were just looking for athletes, guys that were competitive, guys that were good students, to really rebuild that program or just build it. It hadn't been good since the 70s when Johnny Majors and Earl Bruce were there. They hadn't been to a bowl game in 17 years or something like that. So I went there, and I got one scholarship offer for football, and I took it, and that was to Iowa State. Now, if I was from Eastern Iowa, most people in Eastern Iowa were Hawkeye fans back in the day, unless they were farmers. And that was pretty much who were the Iowa State fans. My parents weren't really farmers. And so, we grew up. My grandfather was a big Iowa wrestling fan, grew up probably watching more Hawkeye stuff in Iowa State. We didn't get those channels. Plus, nothing was on TV back then, right? I mean, it wasn't like now where, Iowa State might play on any of 9 different, Fox Sports and ESPN networks. And so, things just weren't on TV as much. And so, anyway, I come out to Ames, Iowa, and I'm like the 5th string quarterback my freshman year. I felt like I was terrible. This is all new to me. Truly learn how to drop back correctly and timing and trying to learn the game. And I was just like this raw athlete who had a pretty good arm. He could throw a baseball pretty hard and could throw a football decently, but it was not something that I grew up with that youth coaching. or anything. So I was truly a raw athlete starting from scratch, and just continue to improve. And my redshirt freshman year, I was the backup. I beat out a couple guys to be the backup, and I also was the holder. You know, I always thought I was pretty good at catching the ball, so I was like, well, I might as well try to learn how to get on the field. How can I help the team? How can I be valuable to this team? So I learned how to hold and held for the next 3 years. And then my junior year, I they loved me so much after being there for 3 years. They brought in 2 junior college quarterbacks to compete with me for the starting job. Yeah, they were totally sold after 3 years that Sage Rosenfels was going to bring them to a bowl game. And my junior year, we went 4-7, but that was the most wins we'd had at that time. We went 2-1, 3, and 4 my first 4 years, and it was amazing. They did not fire the head coach yet, Dan McCarney. That doesn't happen very often nowadays. And so he got his 6th year, my senior year, and we did put it all together. We were close my junior year. That 4-7 could have been 7-4. College football, pro football. It's if you're the difference between 6-10 and 10-6 in the NFL is a couple field goals here, an injury here, a play here, whatever. And it's the same with, same in college football. Everything is so close. And so my senior, we knew if we put it together, we had a good football team, and we ended up going 9-3. And as the quarterback, I got to reap a lot of those benefits of being the leader, despite throwing for 10 touchdowns. Threw for 52%. I was not Drew Brees coming out. He and I came out the same year. He was at Purdue. He's throwing the ball 65 times a game. I'm throwing the ball like 18 times a game because we had great running backs and a great O-line. And so we were sort of like Wisconsin light at Iowa State. McCarney, our coach, had come from Wisconsin, so that was our style of football. It was not complicated. We were not going to air it out, or whatever. I don't know if I maybe threw a game where I had 40 passes or not. Probably like 30, 35 passes is the most I ever had my senior year. So, got to the NFL, drafted in the 4th round by Washington. I don't like to say their team name if I can. I call them Washington, in our nation's capital. And, played for Dan Snyder, Marty Schottenheimer. Brian Schottenheimer was my quarterback's coach. And that was my entry in the NFL as a 3rd-string quarterback all year. Steve Spurrier came in after Marty got fired after an 8-8 season, and I was traded to Miami late in the training camp there. Loved playing for Spurrier. Got, I'm sure, a few stories off of him. And next thing I'm down with Dave Wanstead and Ricky Williams and Norv Turner and Mike Shula in Miami. And then next, after 3 years of that, Saban comes in, and I got Jason Garrett as my quarterback's coach and Scott Linehan as my coordinator, and obviously playing for Saban. That was a whole, experience. And Will Muschamp, who's a South Carolina head coach, he was our quasi defensive coordinator, and that whole staff, right? And then, on to Houston with Kubiak and Shanahan, and then to Minnesota, and Mike Sherman was on that staff. I'm trying to think of some other coaches on that staff. That was I loved playing in Houston. That was a great group of guys. Then I worked a trade in Minnesota because I was hoping to start up in Minnesota, and then Brett Favre showed up. So I obviously didn't play, but I got some. That was a hell of a year. I could probably write a chapter in a book about the 2009 Minnesota Vikings, and I'm sure Vikings fans would read it. That was the first time I ever written an article before. I wrote an article after that game. Sat on it for 4 years, and then when I retired, I was talking to Peter King at a coffee shop in New York, and he was asking me questions about that game. And we're talking about different things, and I told him one story. He goes, "Oh man, that is a great story." I go, "Well, actually, I wrote that as part of like a 1/10 of this article I sort of wrote. That was just a sort of a recollection of what happened that game and that season, because it was such a crazy year." Being Favre's backup, and that was my first ever article that I ended up writing, and ended up being in Sports Illustrated, and ended up being the Favre's commemorative edition. So probably my first article was my most famous one, and I've been writing random thoughts ever since.
Yeah. Now, Sage, I want to back up a little bit. When you're drafted by the Redskins, you sat out, or you were 3rd string the whole year. Do you think that benefited you from in your growth as a quarterback? I mean, you mentioned you didn't throw the ball a lot in college, and then you come to the NFL, and I'm sure the schemes and everything were more complex for you. Or what was that first year like for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I've been sort of describing it here, with football being, it's amazing how much more complicated it's the pro level than on the college level than the high school, and as you get to the youth level, it's so. I mean, that's all you do all day long. Right, that's from 7:30 in the morning until 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night. that's all you do. College, you go to class, you have all these other things going on. They don't have you all the time.
There's a lot of rules. Yep.
There's a lot more rules. Plus, they only have you for a couple of years. When the pros, you play for a long, long time. These coaches, that's all they do, and there's a lot of money in it, and so there's a lot of pressure that goes into it. And so the advancement of the game, the complexity of the game is obviously at a premium, and so you learn so much more. So I was so raw going from high school to college. I was probably just as raw going from college to the pros, and I don't think it's a knock on me at Iowa State. That was the type of offense that we were in. But when I got to the pros and I started talking about these sort of complicated protections and these more complicated coverages, and we had so many protections, it was really a West Coast, pure West Coast, and the details of it were nothing I had seen before. Plus, obviously, the speed of the game and all those things. But if you know what you're doing and you understand how the game works, and you walk up to the ball, you sort of know the coverage, even though people are walking around because you have a few tricks up your sleeve because you understand the game better. You don't have to be, it's not as complicated if you actually understand what's going on. But I had no idea what was going on. So then the game seemed really fast. Obviously, people talk about the speed of the game. Yeah, it's faster, but it's really the complexity of the game because there's so much going on and so many things that can go on. And NFL coaches, quarterback coaches demand so much of you to know what's going on, understand everything. So then you add in the speed. But I don't think the speed is. I mean, it's definitely more than college. The field seems smaller in the pros than it does in college, even though it's not, because the guys are just bigger, faster, and stronger. Mm-hmm. But really, it's more the fact that there's just so much going on in your brain, and you're trying to process all that information from what you know, what you've been told, and what you're supposed to be reading, but then obviously then what's going on the other side. It's a lot of information to process, and that's to me the biggest difference between guys who make it in the NFL for a long time and guys who don't. Some people just can't process massive amounts of information very quickly. That's got nothing to do with being a 4.0 student or a 2.5 student. It's about processing information. Yeah. And some people just can, and some people just can't. And the guys that don't last very long just can't process that information.
So what do you think about the guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, who were just essentially thrown to the fire from day one? Now, do you think? I mean, obviously, you just mentioned it's better for you to sit back and process the game and get your checks, your hot reads, and everything like that in line. But these guys are thrown to the fire immediately. How would you think your career would have been different if you were just thrown to the fire immediately? Do you think?
Oh, I would have played my rookie year and I've been out. I mean, listen, I was Nathan Peterman waiting to happen.
Yeah, all right. So you bring up him. How you bring up him though? Is that really Nathan Peterman's fault, or is that just the evolution, the growth of a quarterback who's just thrown into the mix?
I do think college players are being taught more about the game than when I was in college, for one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, him going in right away, that's a recipe for disaster. And some guys can do it and some guys can't. I got to think if Nathan Peterman does not play a snap of NFL football for 3 to 4 years, but just plays in the preseason and plays well. Plays well in the preseason because you see some basic stuff and you get better and you work on your trade. And because I watch him throw, he throws a nice ball. Yeah. I'm sure he's a smart guy, but maybe he's not quite ready yet. And some guys are. I firmly believe that the two quarterbacks you were talking about, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, that they are ready to play. And yeah, they're not all the way there yet. And they got to get better. And there's a lot that goes on, but physically they're definitely there. And you can tell mentally they've been taught really well in the past. I mean, listen, Baker Mayfield came with Lincoln Riley. I think Lincoln Riley's a great offensive mind. They know how to put points up and yards up at Oklahoma. It's not just the athletes. They're doing it back to back with these quarterbacks. And at USC, they're in a lot of pro style type of stuff. So I think Sam Darnold also, had that leg up on a guy like myself who was coming from a pretty raw situation in college. And so, yeah, I think if you can sit, it's great to sit. Yeah. I mean, I think that's sometimes why these backups, who they've been backups and they somehow worked their way in and they sat and then they learned, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, where was this guy, before? Like, where was Case Keenum before? He's a starting quarterback in the NFL, but no one thought he was for a number of years. Maybe he wasn't his rookie year, his first couple years. All those practices, all that preseason game, a lot of times the reason those backups do end up, getting to the starting spots or near the starting spots, or being in the league for a long time but never were super talented. They're lucky they didn't play right away. I'm I always think if I had to play a lot in my first 3 years, I think I would have been in trouble.
Yeah, and going back to that as well, just looking at your past and all the offenses you played in, at one point you learned 3 offenses in 3 years. What was the hardest part for you just adjusting to the offense that you were learning year after year as coach was getting fired, another coach was getting fired, or they were bringing someone else in? What was the hardest thing for you to grow as a player? You're still trying to get a hold of the speed of the game. Now you're learning a new scheme. How hard was that to juggle?
So I was lucky that my freshman year at Iowa State, Steve Loney was our coordinator, and we were sort of a very basic West Coast offense, and some of our terminology was West Coast terminology. So that was like the first language I used. Now, it wasn't nearly as advanced as all the NFL teams are, but I had a sort of a base there, just of how they do the words, how they do the number system, how they do protections. There was some basic stuff there. When I got to Washington my rookie year, we were also West Coast offense. So sort of, if I was ever in a West Coast system, I could figure it out. There's definitely going to be differences between Darrell Bevel and Kyle Shanahan's, but for the most part, the words, the formations, a lot of that stuff is very, very similar. The hard part for me was when I think the hardest for me was when I got to the New York Giants. That was Kevin Gilbride's offense, and it's a great offense. They won 2 Super Bowls with it, and Eli obviously had, excuse me, a great, that great run those first 10 years of his career, but it was very complex, totally different language, totally different protections. Eli audible all the time. At West Coast offense, you don't audible all that much usually. Usually they try to build plays where you have answers within the play. So then the quarterback can just go back and go, here's my footwork. I'm going to go back, boom, boom, and boom, and there'll be an answer for me. They've created a play that has answers for me. That offense wasn't really like that. It was sort of like, here's the play. If you see something, Eli, you have the entire menu to go to find something better, or rig the protection in a way where you can pick up that blitz or whatever. And it was all completely new. And I got traded week 1 of the NFL season. I was completely over my head and trying to learn this thing. If I had to play that year, I have no idea how that would have worked out. But I was the holder.
It held a good football.
I held a good football, and I hadn't held for 10 years. And our holder was a rookie punter, never held before. He was really struggling. Sage, what can you do? Learn to do more. That's like my recommendation. Always try to find another skill or learn to do more to help your team, no matter what your sport is. And I got in there and I held, and Lawrence Tynes had, I think he went 17 of 18 the rest of the year. I'm pretty proud of that. So once you learn a skill, it's hard to sort of forget it. And
right.
I was lucky I learned how to hold, basically just so I could get a letter my freshman year in college.
Yeah, and that's something I always tell my kids I coach too. The more you know, the more valuable you are, right? So, and it's especially acquiring skills that you don't necessarily want to do, but if you have them, you can get on the field and play. So I want to back up even more. Well, I shouldn't say back up even more, but go back a little bit in your career playing for Gary Kubiak. We had Dan Orlovsky on. He was talking about Gary Kubiak would have a sheet. I'm sure you can attest to this too. He had a sheet of just everything, checks, audibles, play calls, everything. And he would just go over it with all the quarterbacks front to back. And that thing was labeled, and it was very frustrating for him to learn initially. How was that for you when you played under Gary? Was it the similar?
You're talking like the Denny's menu that you So Coobs, he was all about preparation.
Yeah.
And then sort of, he felt like once you're prepared, you shouldn't have to stress out. Like, I know what you're doing. But his way of knowing you're prepared going into the game wasn't that you told him you watched 7 hours of film or anything like that. It was on Saturday night. There would be a special teams meeting for an hour. And during that meeting, the quarterbacks went into a room at the hotel next door, and we wouldn't watch film usually or anything like that. We would go over the Denny's menu, and everything is there was third downs, third and 1 to 2, third and 3 to 5, third and 3 to 6, third and 7 plus, third and 10 plus. There was 4 minute in there. You had all your basic calls, first down, second down, what are your audibles, all those things, and he'd go through. He wouldn't go through all of it. He just sort of find stuff here and there. Hey, when we have, I write, 15 week on, and they got this, what are you going to do? And he would bounce around the room and a lot of times ask the young quarterbacks. A lot of times he knew his starting guy knew what he was doing. So, all right, now we'll ask the young guys a little bit. He would get into sometimes, hey, we're in West right slot this week. For what are our 5 pass plays out of West right slot? All right. So you have to go like, oh crap, like, what are the 5 plays out of that one formation? And we literally have probably 30 formations in the game plan of different things. But that was his way, that knowing that you've gone over the plays, you've studied it. Sometimes you get in there, you might get in there West right slot and then hear the tail end of it. And they're like, what is that? With that thing is the speaker's not always perfect, by the way. It's not like you and I are talking now. There's, you might just hear bits and pieces. The things go out sometimes. So if you hear bits and pieces, you need to know the rest of that play and then deliver it to the team. And so, yeah, I don't think I was ever stressed out about it. I actually enjoyed it because that was something that I was good at. I was good at knowing all those plays and knowing how I was doing, so I could anticipate. But it was always sort of fun to see these young guys come in and they just did not want to be called on, especially if you like added a practice squad guy mid-season. He had been there for a couple of weeks. And, and Kubiak knew this. He knew he could almost mess with them because, there's just no way you're going to know an entire offense like the rest of us who've been there for years in just a couple of weeks. And so we try to keep it simple with those guys. But, those guys are probably more nervous. They were hoping just, me and Matt Schaub or whatever would answer all the questions and they'd work their way out of it. But occasionally they get put on the hot seat and usually they didn't do very well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because when we had Orlovsky on, he literally grabbed a sheet from his desk and it was this huge sheet. And it's funny you mentioned a Denny's menu because that was one of his big points was how large the sheet was with all the calls on it and everything.
Yeah. But there'd be, we had Andre Johnson at the time. I think there was like 10 pass plays in there that was like, get Andre the ball. Like, we need to get Andre the ball. It's the second quarter. We throw him the ball one time. Let's get Andre the ball. And so we'd go to that play. I mean, football is a situational game. It's a lot of things, but one thing is it's situational more than other sports. I think basketball is situational in the last minute or a couple minutes maybe, but other than that, it's just sort of the same game. Football, every single play is a different situation, from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 5 or 2nd and 12. They're vastly different at the highest levels of what you might want to call there. And so you have to have everything covered just in case. You have to have the specialty plays when you're on your own 10-yard line with 20 seconds left and you're just hoping to get out to Hail Mary range. What are the plays you call? Those plays are different than the plays you call the traditional West Coast system, based off of what you're going to see and what's the best chance to get the ball 30 yards downfield, right? So football is very situational, and Kubiak, like almost all NFL coaches, they're very well. People think it's crazy, but and obviously you can't call those plays, but you have to have it ready just in case. And a lot of times there's plays you ran all summer, but you didn't really practice during the week because you only can practice so many. But obviously the players can very easily, sort of recollect them and you quickly install them. You don't have to run them in practice. And the players can get to them if that's, they feel like there's a coverage or something they're seeing that play would be the best option.
Now, Sage, you've rattled off a number of coaches and coordinators that you've played under. One of them in Houston is Kyle Shanahan, who of course has gone on to be a great offensive coordinator for the Falcons, doing a great job right now. It looked great. Nick Mullins coming in and executing his offense, just a week ago for the Niners. What did you see from him and even other guys like, Darren Bevel, these guys that have had success, well after you've crossed paths with them? What did you see in them that would lead you to believe that they would, go on to become good head coaches if they were just coordinators, or go from positional coach to top offensive coordinators? Is there a common denominator amongst any of them that you think, or is it just varies, from personality to personality?
Yeah, I think it's two things, and Kyle had them both. I knew Kyle would be a head coach, and I knew he'd be a head coach not because his dad was Mike Shanahan. I knew Kyle Shanahan would be a head coach because he understood the game. All right, when he was sort of coming up, he worked not for his dad. He worked for John Gruden down in Tampa. And he worked for Monty Kiffin a lot. He did a lot of stuff with the defense. So he really understood defense because Monty Kiffin was such a great teacher. One of the all-time, again, one of those guys that could be a Hall of Fame coordinator, but, never wanted to be a head coach. So he really understood defense, which then he really understood offensive concepts that could attack those defenses. So he started off as our wide receivers coach, then quarterbacks coach, then coordinator. But when he was our quarterbacks coach, I really realized, wow, I was learning. So I was year 6, 7 at that point, and I was learning a ton about the game. I was learning how to run routes from tight splits and how to create combinations from stacks and from bunches, and how to create route combinations that give you leverage advantages. Gets guys like Andre Johnson off the press, and so he can work his way through unimpeded. And then you can get a switch on a different guy, or how teams will go to a certain type of defense, a box defense when you see a bunch or something like that, and how they pick guys up one by one, and how they flow sort of out of that those bunch and stacks. And that was, I never really learned all that stuff as much before. And that's no offense to my previous coaches, they just didn't do it as much. But Kyle was really into it. He was really into studying that stuff. It's also where I really understood how that zone scheme that Shanahan, McVay, stuff those guys do, that's pretty much all they do. Inside zone, outside zone. Well, because of that, you sort of become an expert at it, because you don't have a million schemes. It's very basic. But what's exciting with it, and what's great for a quarterback, and I'm sure Dan would have said the same thing, is that the play action type stuff and the bootleg type stuff, it's very quarterback friendly. When you can fake hand the ball off to your running back in a play that looks just like the running play, and the D linemen, the linebackers, it looks just like a running play to them, because it's coached so well with that detail with the O linemen, the running backs, and your technique, and they really harp on that. You get guys running wide open down the field. Safety's coming up. The linebackers suck up, and then there's big cavities behind those linebackers for the crossing routes and things. And again, you turn around and, is Andre Johnson open? Yes, he is throwing the ball. Is he not open? Who's my next guy in my progression? But, that initial fake, and then because of the zone scheme, it really does almost create a wall with the protection. Different than what they call a gap scheme, which is, guards pulling, tackles pulling. There's a lot of leakage in those types of plays. But when you zone stuff off, you sort of are creating a natural wall just by how you're blocking it. And so that wall gave you good protection. And so, quarterback can go back. You have a lot more time. The D-line has to play run first, so they're not rushing the passer right away. It allows you time to go back there and take a shot down the field, or work to your running backs, who are usually, after you fake to them, linebackers are scrambling back to try to cover that deeper stuff, because they know they just got fooled. Then that leaves the running back wide open, sometimes in the flat or over the ball or something. And so it was a very quarterback-friendly scheme. The bootleg stuff was great, and you don't have to be a great athlete to run it. And we're seeing that. A guy like Nick Mullins comes in right away, and like, who is this kid? And I'm not saying Nick Mullins going to be an NFL starter, but not a lot of teams with their third string quarterback could come in versus anybody and have much success. And he came and looked great. And obviously he's got this second game versus the Giants on Monday Night Football here. But, I think he was guys who weren't super talented could play well in that system. Maybe not be a starter well, but play well enough. It's hard to find great quarterbacks to be like, your franchise guy and to be a top 10 or top 15 guy. But there's a lot of guys out there who are 20 through 70 who are all pretty much the same as far as their like skill set, their natural ability. If you can get those guys that are your backups, your second, third guy to play like they're the 35th best quarterback, that's pretty dang good if you're a team looking to just try to stay in the playoff hunt or something with your backup quarterback.
Definitely. Yeah. And, I did want to ask, the Viking situation, you get there, it looks like you're going to have a chance to compete for the starting job, but then a guy by the name of Brett Favre comes into the picture. So I just wanted to ask you, of course, one of the best ever to do it. Was there anything in particular that you saw from him, how he approached the game? I mean, absolute gunslinger, he's the epitome of it. But was there anything that you learned from him that, much like, Kyle Shanahan kind of opened your eyes to something? Was there anything he did that there was a similar sort of epiphany?
He, and because of that Kyle system being sort of so quarterback friendly, there's not a lot of manipulation of protections. Favre was the first time where I saw somebody really manipulating protections. I mean, he'd take protections and he would say, I'm fairly sure they're bringing this blitz and that defensive end is going to drop, right? So he would actually make a call and slide the entire line So literally that defensive end is unblocked if he so chooses to come. And like, that is ballsy. That is a bit ballsy to do that, right? Like that, it takes a lot of guts to go, all right, I'm going to, I think he's going to drop because I think the blitz is coming from the other side. So this guy's going to go this way. So I'm going to do it. Like I would never do that. I don't have the guts to do that. I'll find a different answer. I'm not going to leave a defensive end free. Who's paid millions of dollars to try to kill me, but he was really good at manipulating protections. The way he threw, he created a ton of torque in his throwing motion. And I actually think his throwing motion is how, what you're seeing other guys actually throw a little bit more like him now, where he wasn't like a step through guy, like a pitcher or something, like a Major League Baseball pitcher. He didn't step through the throw. He really stayed on his right side and created so much torque with his hips and his arm action, is the whip of his arm. He was crazy accurate for having a strong arm. Usually guys with strong arms aren't that accurate. He made unbelievably accurate throws in the tight windows. But honestly, the most impressive thing about him was how tough he was. He got the crap beat out of him all year. He took a ton of hits. And
at the end of his career too, not a young guy.
I was 31. I think he was 39, turning 40, I believe. And I thought to myself, I'm 31. There's no way now I can take those hits that he's taken without breaking something, breaking a hand or a wrist or something, an ankle or whatever. And then to go like in 9 years, I think I was in year 9, to be what I've been through now, and to play that entire time and then play another 9 years and then to take those hits, like I have no idea how his body. He had different DNA than me for sure. He had big, thick fingers, big, strong hands, like thick wrists. I know it sounds crazy, but like he's a big boned guy, and I have these like little skinny, fingers where I blame my dad. He's got chicken legs or whatever. So that's just how I was. But I was amazed by his toughness on the hits that he took and how he'd get up from them. He was a great competitor. All these guys are great competitors, but he was, Drew Brees is, Tom Brady's are great competitors, but his toughness with all the hits he took was incredible. It was incredible.
Now, Sage, my last question here before I hand it back to Steve. It's how did you approach each game as a backup quarterback? What's the mindset going into these games now? You're involved with the game plan. You essentially got to be ready at any moment's notice because a big hit could happen at any time. But mentally, how did you approach these games?
Well, the hard part is when you practice, especially in the NFL, usually you go, offense. So, in college, you have, the offense is on one field with the whole scout team, and the defense is on another for the scout team. You don't have that in the pros, right? It's more like high school. You might only have, 40, 50 kids on your whole team, and you got practice against each other. So basically the defense is the scout team in a sense, right? So usually it's, sort of ones versus twos, and the twos run the other, whether it's defense or offense, they're the scout team and they run those schemes for you, or whatever. And so when you're the backup quarterback and everything is in tens, you do 10 offensive plays, 10 defensive plays, 10 more offensive plays. It's sort of how it usually works. Well, the backup quarterback might get one of those 10 plays. Mm-hmm. And if it is, it's like, here's a run play for you, just so you stay, get used to being under center with our starting center in case the guy goes down, so you're not fumbling snaps. You're just sort of executing the system. The guys hear your voice because you're just not getting those reps. You're just not. You're running the scout team, so you try to make the scout team as realistic as possible for you. Try to put the other team schemes into what your system is, and work with those young receivers and tight ends and stuff. And it's. I would say the key is getting completions. Then you get called upon. You get to go in there. My thing was, get completions, right? And the ball's not going anywhere when it's in my hand, right? We're only going to move the ball if it's in somebody else's hand. So my job be getting somebody else's hand. So I was taking the quickest completion I could get, quickest and easiest completion I could get usually. Preparation wise, I would say most of my career, I would actually after practice. Grab the quarterbacks. Coach Jason Garrett was great with this with me, and we would go through a lot of those, passing plays and 7-on-7 and team. Excuse me. That obviously I didn't get to run. Not all of them, but some of them. maybe 20, 30 of them, get some young receivers out there, have them throw those routes that I didn't get to throw, go through some of those audibles. He would pretend like he was a safety or something. Hey, I'm blitzing. What are you going to do? Go through that. So you're sort of going through the process. And the more you can go through the process as a backup, the more when the actual real things happen, you've sort of been there before, even though in reality you actually haven't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as we start to get close to the end here, I wanted to ask, you've talked about how little you threw at Iowa State and all the different coaches that you've played for, the change of teams. At the end of the day, despite what might seem like disadvantages that have been dealt your way, you played in the NFL for a decade. So what was it about Sage Rosenfels that despite the circumstances, you played for 10 years in a league where most guys are lucky to play 2 or 3? You lasted a decade. Was it you seeking that extra help and time with coaches so that you were always ready? Because, it's so, having a backup quarterback is so valuable. Teams seem like they have a different one every 1 to 2 years, but teams traded for you. They wanted to have you on their team. So what was it about what you were doing that actually gave you this long career?
I think other than my unbelievably good looks, I think that in sports my entire life, going really back to when I was a kid, playing against my brothers or whatever, it was never really, I never really thought it was about me, like how my performance was, how many points did I score, or what was my passing percentage of a high school football game. It was always about how are we going to win this game? What can I do to help us win this game? When I was in high school, I was the quarterback. I was also an all-state DB, and I was the kicker and the punter. All right, what can I do? And I was better at doing that than the other guys because I worked on it. What can I do to help my team win? When you're the backup quarterback, helping your team win is not complaining that you're not starting and you should be in there. Or your dad going on the radio or getting upset, or whatever. I stayed out of all of that. How am I going to help this team win? And whether there's a third guy, the second guy, that's your role, and you're not really, people say that you're always in control of your own life. You are, but you're really not. Like, I wasn't in control of making a decision whether I should start or not. It was completely out of my hands. The only thing I could control was how am I fitting into this football team to make myself valuable? Because being valuable keeps you around. As soon as, you complain a lot, you're a bad locker room guy, you get in trouble off the field, you don't have good grades, that hurts your value, and it's got nothing to do with your performance of actually being on the field. So, I always took that approach of what can I do to help this football team win games, whether I was starting or I was the backup. That probably goes back to my youth level. I never really cared about what my stats were. I was really just solely focused on how we're going to win football games or how we're going to win basketball games or whatever it might be.
It's awesome. Good advice for any young athletes out there. Well, Sage, thanks for going through the glory days with us. But now I want to talk to you about what you've been up to now. Just as recently as this summer, I saw the barbecue for Haiti, and now's a good time to let everyone know you can follow Sage on Twitter and Instagram at Sage Rosenfels 18. I promise you it is worth the follow. Talk to me a little bit about the barbecue for Haiti. You write for The Athletic. You've started getting out there, doing a little bit of singing, some stand-up. I mean, you're a very multifaceted guy. So tell us, how have you been approaching retirement from the NFL and what you're doing now, pursuing different passions?
Yeah, well, the transition from NFL player to non-NFL player, and I'm still completely working on it. You realize when you're, as I said, like when I was in high school, I had school, and I usually had practice before school and or after school. And then I went home and I had dinner and I studied and I went to bed, and I repeated that for, 6 years, basically middle school and high school. Then you go to college and it's sort of the same thing. I mean, every day you're lifting weights and you're going to class and you're running and all the, practice or whatever it might be. And then you have all that structure, everything is structured, especially like in college, hey, first means it, or practices it, you have class in the morning, then practices at this time. And then in practice, like everything's broken down to the minute, to the second. I mean, there's a clock all the time. An NFL day, starts in the morning and everything is literally, meeting starts at 7:45. Next meeting starts at 8:30. Next meeting starts at 9:30. Then we have a walkthrough at 11. Then lunch is at noon. Then you're back on and back into, on the field at 1:30. Then you have practice. Then after practice, you watch film. Everything is like so regimented and so planned out for you. And then you get done. And then you nothing is regimented. I wake up in the morning and it's like, what should I do today? And a lot of guys really struggle with that. I definitely did. It's a serious issue. You don't realize how much structure you have in your life. It ends up really inhibiting you when you're done. And I think a lot of college athletes, they struggle with it. I mean, if I'm sick in college or the pros, you go to the team doctor or the team trainer and you say, hey, I'm not feeling well today. Next thing you know, you have a doctor's visit lined up for you. Somebody either makes a phone call, the doctor shows up to practice. You meet with him in the back room. He says you got, this, that, and the other, and here's some antibiotics. You don't see a bill. You don't see anything. Everything is sort of, done for you in a sense. You have to make an appointment, all those types of things. And so everything is sort of, in a sense, taken care of, and you have all that structure. Then you're done. You have none of that. You wake up and what are you going to do today? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And, it's been 6.5 years for me since I've been done. And it's, trying to figure out who you are, what do you want to be? Some guys, they want to be finance guys, or some guys want to be, stay in the media world or whatever. I think for me, I just try to figure out, like, what do I know? What do I know more than almost everybody else? And what I know is football, and what I know is quarterbacks. And so for the most part, that's what I try to utilize, whether I'm writing articles from a quarterback's perspective, which I do think we probably know the most of all the positions, because we have to understand defense basically as much as offense. And a lot of, receivers don't understand the complexities of pass protection and things like that. Quarterbacks do. We understand how the gap schemes work and all these things. So how can I, because I didn't want to do something I didn't enjoy or I didn't understand or know. I didn't want to start from scratch. And so for me, being in the media was a natural thing. Also, quarterbacks usually are pretty good communicators. But another huge aspect of being an athlete, be a good communicator. And a lot of people aren't. In particular, quarterbacks, you have to be a good communicator. And so, how can I communicate the information that as I'm watching these football games to the audience, whether I'm on the radio, or whether I'm writing an article. So I realized that people liked that input, that from the quarterback's perspective, a guy who could communicate what he is seeing, and that has value, and people seem to enjoy it. So I stay busy. Omaha is tough for that. I don't live in an NFL city, so I can't be on like the local beat. But it's become a thing that I guess it's a hobby less than a career. It's fun to get paid to do things that, you enjoy, and you get to go on the radio for a half an hour, and somebody cuts you a check. Not a bad deal, right? Yeah. I get paid to watch football games. I'll watch the Bears game tomorrow morning and go on to Score in Chicago, and they'll pay me to talk about Mitchell Trubisky for 15 minutes. It's like every guy's dream. Like, I think it's like the greatest thing, right? Yeah. And but also it's like there's other things I'd like to be other than just a football player. And what is this platform that I have on Twitter, other than just me making me more money and boosting my ego, talking about football or whatever? How can I use that for what I think is the betterment of more people, on this planet, and speak out about certain things. When I was growing up, this kid, Patrick, he and I were doubles partners in tennis, and he was my point guard on my basketball team. Well, as I was playing football for the last, 12, 13 years, he had been in Haiti as basically a missionary, and doing all these great things in Haiti. And I wanted to help him out. It's like, how could I help you out? You're sort of like the boots on the ground guy. I'm just this guy who was a former quarterback and, or whatever. And so, I realized I could use my platform, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, whatever it might be, to try or just my friends here in Omaha, who may have a few extra bucks, and try to raise awareness for him, and some other things that I, get to be involved in, and try to make an impact. That's not about making money. I'm going to go speak at the Nebraska State Penitentiary in a couple of weeks. That makes me feel great that I'll be able to do that. Maybe having some sort of impact on these people's lives. And, you realize, and I have a 17-year-old son now, and I talked about sometimes you really have like only a couple of things in life. You have your time and sort of your resources. Obviously, your resource being a time, or time being a resource, but you sort of have the money that you have and the job that you have, and then what are you going to do with your time? And every decision you make, whether it's him playing video games too much and not studying, or me going to a bar rather than something else I could be doing, right? Where do you allocate your time? And I try to, when I get a chance, to allocate my time to the things that have an impact for the greater good. And sometimes I think that's on Twitter, speak my mind maybe about politics or a situation that I don't agree with, or go into a prison to try to just talk to those people in prison and see if I can have a positive effect on their lives, or going to my kids' school lunch and hanging out with their classmates and maybe bring up that we should be using so much plastic with all these Ziploc bags, like so it's what is your platform, and what do you do with your time and your resources? And I try to put my money to the things that matter most to me as well, in different in different organizations or whatever. And I've also realized that I may not have a huge impact on a huge company like the United Way, for example, but my say $1,000 can go a long way to somebody that has a one person nonprofit, or to a small school or to a class, and how that can completely change the game for them. I try to sort of act more locally, I guess, in that sense as well. So I guess that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do all I can, stay as busy as I can. And but yeah, I mean, not having a job, and my kids are all in school now. So what are you going to do all day? And money will drive you. Having too much money is not always a great thing, because you're sort of not involved in the real world. And I don't want to go sit in an office all day. I don't want to do that. I like being on the practice field and being around people. So I'd love to coach someday, I think, but I'm just not going to do that now. It's so much time and such a commitment, and I really enjoy being around my kids as much as possible, and being at their schools and coaching their teams and those things like that. I guess I always say that I was lucky enough to sort of live a dream much longer than almost everybody else got to live theirs. For 17 years, I basically got to live a dream. And, now I guess my dream is to just be around my kids as much as possible as they grow up fast, and try to teach them a little bit here and there the best I can. And hopefully they end up being outstanding adult citizens.
That's awesome.
Great. Yeah.
Well, Sage, just to close this, we have this last segment called the Gauntlet, where I just need to ask you a few very quick questions where I need your knee-jerk reaction. What is most important, having the number one offense or the number one defense?
Ooh, defense will keep you in a lot more games. I'll tell you that. Very rarely do great offense. I mean, Texas Tech has always generally had like one of the best, or the best offense in the Big 12. They have yet to get to a Big 12 championship game, as far as I know. I mean, they don't ever win the conference, right? So, but the teams that with really good defenses, you're in a lot more games. There's a lot more, lower scoring. You have a chance to win more football games. And, I'm not sure if it's easier to do one or the other, but I think, defense is like rebounding. You can do it every single night. Even when your shot's off, you can always play great defense and rebound. Or offense, some nights you're on fire and some nights you're not. And if you're going to lose football games because you're just can't move the ball, well, that's a shame. But if you play really good defense and your offense is just generally sort of average, or is having an off night, you can stay in a lot of football games with a really good defense.
Yep.
I, as a quarterback, would much rather have my team be absurdly good on defense than having the pressure of having to, it's like a basketball player trying to put up 40 points every night. That's hard to do.
Right. Yeah. Now, is there a singular player or a coach that you really wish, if you could go back and do it all over again, that you would have had the chance to play with or play for?
Is there one I wish I could have played with? Or
yeah, whether a player or a coach, is there any one person that you wish you had a chance to have played with?
Well, a lot. I mean, that'd be so much fun to watch Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. I mean, to be able to be in practice with Aaron Rodgers and see how he throws. I mean, he makes unbelievable throws in games. I imagine practice is just a trip. What he does is like nothing I've ever seen. I would have loved to, I get to, I'm talking about football, my year spent with Favre, my year spent with Eli. You learn so much. I learned so much from those guys and from these different coaches, but the one thing I don't know anything about is that Belichick system and the Josh McDaniels system. I don't know. I know a little bit how they do formations and some of their language because there's a Gilbride had a similar language, but I don't know how they game plan. I'd love to know how they game plan, how they design things, and what he's looking for. Because his level of consistency all these years is just nothing short of incredible. And that probably playing with Tom behind Tom Brady more than playing for Belichick probably interests me.
And we actually had Mark Clayton on, who played wide receiver for the Rams when McDaniels was there, and he really spoke highly of learning from Josh, just how Josh was all about what the opposing defenses do. We find their weaknesses and we attack them, and then we find another way to attack it in another way. So it was just very interesting hearing his take on it.
Yeah, I think McDaniels is a top 5 coordinator. I think McVay and Kyle Shanahan are also right up there. I think what Kyle and Sean, what they do a great job of, when a defense is doing something to take away, let's just say a run, a safety's being too aggressive and stepping up, let's go in there and like we're about to block that safety, because the job of the corner is what they call a crack replace. So now the corner has to get involved in the run game because the safety's blocked. And so how can you design something when a corner's being just a little bit too aggressive that looks like a crack safety and turns into a huge play down the field and guys get wide open? So you can always really tell the coaches who I think are really, really good, because they get guys randomly, one guy a game or somebody completely wide open for a big play. That's all about design and execution, but really understanding what defenses are trying to do to you, then how you can sort of counteract that with some sort of playing concept.
Yeah. Next, is there one or maybe even a couple pregame rituals that you had?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I had anything in particular. I'd say when I was in the New York Giants, we had like 3 guys who would go and throw up in the bathroom. That was Chris Snee, Richie Soybert, and I'm not sure, maybe somebody else. They'd just be in there just heaving every single game. Every single game for like their 10, 12-year careers, they were in there throwing up because of the nerves. They're so nervous, and just build up of the adrenaline would cause them actually to go and throw up. So I didn't have any of that. I didn't really listen to headphones all that much. I'm not a headphones guy. I don't like it when quarterbacks are on the field with their headphones on. I'm thinking that's a time to, communicate with your teammates and talk to guys. And even if it's just sort of goofing around, but sort of like, a bond thing, but some guys like to be in their own space, and that's what gets them going. But, I just like spending those times with my teammates and talking to the guys. I was usually looking at the playbook, continue to look over a lot of, things. Definitely, they have that script you hear about the top 15 or whatever. I'd be sort of looking over that, making sure we had absolutely no mistakes in that top 15. I mean, that was sort of a sin for some teams. If they called a play, you came out in the wrong formation, and that was, the 5th play that was supposed to be in the top 15. That's a big no-no. So I was always sort of prepared up to the very end.
Got it. Best offensive skill position player that you've played with?
Best wide receiver was Andre Johnson. I thought he was awesome. He was incredible. Adrian Peterson was an amazing running back, but a pure handoff running back. Was not good, very good in the passing game. Just didn't have great hands. He had like wrestler hands. He just couldn't catch balls all that great. But it's just as far as a guy you want to hand the ball off to, he was phenomenal. Percy Harvin might have been the most electrifying player that could do everything, because he was a receiver, he was a return guy, he could put him at tailback. That guy was so fast and so powerful and so quick. He played football at a speed that I don't think I ever saw before. When he ran routes and deep routes, he was flying. And, I had a hard time trying to get the ball to him because he was so fast. He'd outrun my arm, and obviously did not run Favre's arm very often. So, yeah, he was a guy that might have been the best sort of combination of speed, strength, power. He'd run guys over a lot of times rather than choosing like a tailback, rather than choosing to run around him. He'd catch the ball and he'd run right over a guy. He was so fast, but also he could play running back. He could play receiver. He could be a kick returner. He was one of the best, most talented guys I ever played with.
Oh,
Ricky Williams was incredible too, by the way. Ricky Williams was like 245 pounds and would outrun everybody. He was really something. And he could do everything. He was great catching the ball in the backfield and pass protection. He was super smart. The year he had 1,850 yards or something. I think my second year in the league, my first year with the Dolphins, I'd never seen a running back run like that before.
Yeah, and everyone you just mentioned is just beyond talented. I mean, it could have guessed AP, Andre, Ricky, so no shock. But one last question for you. What is most important, the players on the roster or the scheme?
Oh, the Jimmies and the Joes versus the X's and the O's, right?
That's right.
Jason Garrett used to always talk about that. You really have to have a combination of both. Coaching, though, is more important in football than it is in any other sport. The X's and O's are more important in football than any other sport. Very rarely do teams have consistent success or just have success in general if their X's and O's are a disaster and they don't really know what's going on. It's a game of organization. Basketball isn't necessarily a game of organization. Tennis is not a game of organization. You can play unbelievable defense and then the guy makes a fadeaway shot. There's nothing you can do about it. That just doesn't happen really in football. The detail and the execution that goes into it is so much relying on really good coaches. And I don't say that about other sports nearly as much. I mean, I don't even know who the coach of the Cleveland was. It, I guess Tyrone Lue, right? I mean, would Cleveland still been to the championship game? I mean, would Golden State still be in the championship games or win these things without Steve Kerr? Possibly, right? But in football, that doesn't happen. You have to have great coaching in football. I think more than the Jimmies and the Joes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Well, Sage, thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us and share your insights. It was definitely a trip. I'm glad we were able to do this. Again, for everyone listening, Sage is on Instagram and Twitter. Sage Rosenfels 18. Sage, again, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, Sage.
Thank you.